All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today on this. Well, I guess it's just rainy here in Baltimore, this rainy Tuesday afternoon. Hope it is sunny, rainy, whatever you'd like it to be where you are. Thanks for joining. As folks are joining in, feel free to drop your name and where you're calling in from in the chat while we're giving folks another minute or two just to settle in. Looks like we already almost have over 150 people in the room, so that's very exciting. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Awesome. Starting to see folks in that chat. Christopher, nice to see to see your name again. I know you were just at the CMWS webinar as well. Awesome. Ashley in Colorado. We got Chicago represented, North Dakota. That's great. For folks who are just joining, welcome to today's webinar. We'll be talking about the Credible Messenger mentoring model. We'll get started in just another minute or two. We want to give folks a chance to jump in and then also share your name and location in the chat. Seeing lots of California. Czech Republic, we got someone from out of the United States. That's amazing. Welcome. Oklahoma, Ohio. So far, we got all corners of the country and beyond represented. So very exciting. Thanks for being here with us. Texas, Georgia. Amazing. So throughout the webinar, feel free to keep dropping in your introductions in the chat, as well as any questions, comments, concerns that you have, any thoughts or ideas as well. We definitely want to get to know all of you a little bit more, just so that we can really get to the core of the conversation today and hear the insights from our amazing presenters and panelists. I'll get started and we'll go on to the next slide. So just to give you all a little bit of background in case you're not familiar with what the National Mentoring Resource Center is, this is a project that's been funded through a cooperative agreement from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, otherwise known as OJJDP, the Office of Justice Programs, and the U.S. Department of Justice. And the NMRC builds on OJJDP's history, leadership, and investments in quality youth mentoring. A little bit about what the National Mentoring Resource Center is. So you can find this online. It's a website, nationalmentoringresourcecenter.org. There are a few really amazing key components to the website, one being a practitioner-focused blog. There's a whole dedicated part of the site just for OJDP grantees, all sorts of evidence-based reviews, research-based resources on different types of programs, models, and populations, some of which will be covered today, but even beyond, from any population you can imagine, from LGBTQ plus youth to juvenile justice impacted youth to BIPOC young people. So definitely feel free to go and check those resources out. We also have a really amazing research board of folks, again, all over the world, all over the country, doing work in this space and churning out all sorts of resources that are up to date and really innovative in the field. Last but not least, you can apply for training and technical assistance at no cost for your mentoring program through the National Mentoring Resource Center. So if you need help with things like recruitment or communications or things like that, you can go on there and request that help from folks, again, all across the country, our amazing technical assistance providers. For this webinar, there are a few different ways that you can all engage with us. Again, like I said, we want to make sure that we're hearing from you and the ideas and experiences that you have. Please remember to direct any chats or comments or concerns or thoughts in that chat box. And then any questions can go in the Q&A box, both which you'll find on that top toolbar. We'll answer some questions from the audience towards the end of the presentation, but feel free to drop any questions as they come up throughout the presentation. And then there's also the option to upvote questions that you'd like to see answered especially. After the webinar, there will be an anonymous survey that we ask you to complete just so that we know how we can do better next time and what we can improve on, change, add, just things to think about. Super helpful. It'll only take about 3 to 4 minutes. And then this webinar is being recorded and you'll be receiving an email with information on how to download this recording, but also the slides and any resources that we talk about today. And so now we do have a poll. It's not this question, but let me launch the question now. So on your screen, you should see a poll around Credible Messenger mentoring. And so the question being, how familiar are you with the concept of Credible Messenger mentoring? So we'll give folks a minute or so to answer that, and then I'll share out the results. Give you another 5 or so seconds before I end the poll. Awesome. Thank you all for answering that. And now I'm sharing the results. So I believe it should be popping up on your screens. And so as you can see, the majority of folks in the room are somewhat familiar with Credible Messenger mentoring. There's about a third of us who are not familiar at all, and then some who are very familiar. So again, it's great to be here with you all, regardless of your knowledge of Credible Messenger mentoring. Thanks for joining. And we're excited to hear your thoughts and responses wherever you fall on that spectrum of knowledge. So thanks for doing that. I'll stop sharing that poll. Next, just for a quick, very high-level overview of the agenda, we already got into the welcome introductions. I'll introduce our panelists and presenters in just a moment, audience polls, and then we'll get into some definitions in history around Credible Messenger mentoring before moving into challenges and opportunities for the future in this space. Then we have some panel discussion questions that we'll talk through before getting into that audience Q&A. So again, feel free to drop in questions in the Q&A box as they come up. And then we'll close out and part ways for now, but know that this is just the beginning of a much larger and more fruitful conversation. So thanks for being here with us today. Now for the exciting part, I get to introduce really, really amazing pioneers and leaders in this field. And I'll have them kind of fill in some of the gaps because I'm just going to do a tiny sliver of the amazing work that they do. But first, we have Tiffany Branch, who is the Credible Messenger Mentor Consultant and Regional Director for We Rise Together with Career Resources. In her work, some of what she does is assisting Credible Messengers with their work with young people who are currently justice involved, impacted, or at risk of being justice involved / impacted. Next, we have Abdul Malik, who is the founder and executive director of FUSED, which stands for Families United for Social and Educational Development. And he founded this organization to work with at-risk youth involved in gangs and their families, addressing antisocial behaviors that's prevalent throughout gang communities. Up next, we have Robert David, the Violence Prevention Manager in the city of Danville, and as well as being a consultant and life coach. And there he created the Community Violence Intervention Collaborative Gang Model, Project Imagine. Last but not least, we have Dr. John Ducksworth, who has provided leadership to court-based programs, community corrections, probation, and juvenile justice agencies, private corrections corporations, and social service agencies. And he's also a licensed trainer in restorative justice principles. So like I said, they all do so much more work than just that brief little introduction. So I'll actually pass it over to each of you to share a little bit more about yourselves and any other gaps you'd like to fill in. And we'll start off with Tiffany.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany Branch, as Jake stated. I've been mentoring for well over 20 years, but I got into Credible Messenger work around 2009 when I found myself being an individual who became justice involved. I've worked for many organizations within New York City who do reentry services. And I've also worked for the Department of Probation, which is one third partner to the Credible Messenger Justice Center, where I was formerly the program coordinator and program consultant. So I'm going to pass it over to my brother, Abdul.
Okay. You flip the picture. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Abdul Malik. I'm the executive director of FUSED, as Jake said. I am formerly incarcerated. I'm a returning citizen. I've done this work for over 20 years in communities in New York City, and I've also been around the country speaking at different juvenile initiatives, speaking to reimagining what criminal justice looks like. My passion for the work is I left my young children when I was in prison to go to prison, and when I came home, my young children were involved, actively involved in the life. And for me, it was personal because I didn't want to see my boys, my sons, my legacies wound up in the same spaces that I wound up in. So in beginning the work, which was personal, addressing the issues for them, I just grew into being able to address the work for young people in my community. And I've been in the work over 20 years.
Hi, my name is Robert David, currently in the city of Danville. I got over 30 years experience in some way, shape, or form, criminal justice, credible messenger. I'm a consultant. Essentially, I create systems in order to find spaces of equity and spaces of chaos and other systems. And currently the violence prevention manager here, and created Project Imagine, which is a community violence intervention collaborative model, which assists high-risk and gang youth.
So I guess you're passing it to me, Robert. My name is Dr. John Duxworth, and I've been involved in this work. I predate what the term credible messenger. I was involved with the prison system predating all the way going back to 1970, because where I was directly involved through my own incarceration. And I've been involved with it ever since. It has really very limited bearing to what I'm going to talk about here. So again, I've been involved in the work a long time. It's a passion of my life. It's in many ways, it's not who I am, but it's what I do on a host of different levels. And I've had the privilege of doing a host of different things, being on both sides of the table. And I'm excited to be here this morning and this afternoon, and looking forward to being able to share with this panel. And with that, I'll send it back to Jake.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much, and grateful to have you all here. And now we can get into what I believe is our first slide, and I'll kick it over to Abdul.
So as you can see, there's on this particular screen, there's 4 components to the definition of what a credible messenger is. Someone with direct contact to the carceral system, someone who has been gang or street associated, someone indirectly impacted, the family member who has been directly impacted by legal or other systems, lived experiences in other systems, foster care, healthcare, and education. So number one, the definition, the initial part of the definition is the bedrock of the credible messenger explanation. It was started and created by folks who were formerly incarcerated, some think leaders who were in prison, who while in prison wanted to impact the entry process and wanted to find out why the prisons was being populated in New York State by black and brown men, right? So they create, or one of the architects of some work that was done was the $1 Million Block, which was helped authored by Eddie Ellis, who then in return being a part of the system, created language to kind of really build out what it would look like once brothers returned home after being released from the prison system and intercepted and investing in spaces to kind of support young people and communities so we could stop the pathways to the prison system. Just turning it over to today, I'm going to really just pivot to what the last point of it is. We know today that as we do this work on the criminal justice systems, really working to reimagine what it looks like for juvenile justice, and even on the adult level of incarceration, there is a new vision of understanding that there's multiple avenues, whether directly or indirectly, that leads to the prison system through social systems as well. And as you can see in that fourth part of the definition, it speaks about folks who have been impacted by the foster care system, or what we call ACS, transitioning out of house into independent living, healthcare, poor healthcare, mental health care, something that we know affects Black and Brown communities on a large scale and is often um, underaddressed in education. The lack of or the fact that we don't have enough people from our communities who are in spaces to kind of support and make sure that our young people get the social emotional uh, intelligence necessary to be successful in academic spaces. So I want to just really be clear that credible messages today are not just people who are formerly incarcerated, but also have experiences in these other spaces and have been able to kind of find triumph, or at least been able to create blueprints to support young folks and community who find themselves actively trying to navigate these systems.
Let me, if I can piggyback on some of the things that Abdul said. And as I'm sitting here, one of the things I'm reminded of, the credible messenger movement in part started out an outgrowth of those who were directly impacted by the system, trying to contribute to finding solutions that the system wasn't finding. Some of our more traditional, whether it be probation, whether it be law enforcement, whether it be clinical community, they were not able to reach youth predominantly who were being impacted by our court system. So here you had this large number, and I want to say a large number, this conscientious group of individuals who had been directly impacted and saw the damage as well as the good that happens. And they wanted to contribute to that. They wanted to be part of the solution. They didn't want to continuously be labeled as the problem or part of the problem. And they were right. We were right. That the solution could be found with those who had experience and connecting, not unlike other systems. You know, I'm often reminded of AA. You know, one drunk got up and said, "I'm a drunk and I can help every other drunk," and now we have AA. And I realize I may be simplifying it, but it's those who are directly impacted being able to offer a solution. And that's part of the outgrowth of what is now a movement across the country. And Robert, I know you wanted to add some stuff, so I'll stop there.
Sure. Yeah, definitely there's been a transition from this definition. I want to make sure everyone understands this is not the totality of what a credible messenger is. It's just giving you some points, and we'll elaborate on these things. But what I've found in my work over the years is that most times the solution or the healing is already compiled in the bacteria or the thing that's hurting people. And what we found with credible messengers is that even though they had a purpose, their purpose was being perverted by some of the knowledge or the information that they had been taught previously. And it was a situation where a desire to do great things, which may have been diverted, and it ended up doing some negative things. And so we were able to provide new information and still keep the essence of who they are as individuals, having a desire to be successful, but changing that direction. So when you think about credible messenger, you think about these definitions, understand, yeah, you know, these individuals were, you know, were returning citizens or they were in street gangs, but in the midst of that, being able to take the essence and the goodness and the strength and the power and their desire to contribute to society, and transitioning that into a structured entity or a structured process where they can benefit the community and use that knowledge that was derived or that was gleaned from some other activities and pull that in to help youth. So just kind of to tie that up with what Abdul and John said, that's kind of how we got to this point. And now, you know, 2023, it goes beyond that, but we'll kind of talk about that later. So thanks.
Thank you all for that. I just want to uplift a question that we just got in the chat really quick that I think it would be helpful to clarify now. Someone is asking, is a credible messenger mentor someone who fits one or more of these criteria, or should a credible messenger meet all of these criteria? And maybe I'll kick it over to Robert to hear your thoughts.
That was kind of what I was alluding to, that they don't necessarily have to meet all of those criteria. It could be someone who has just been in a street gang, or someone who's just been incarcerated, or someone, any one of those, just isolated and using that experience to be a credible messenger in that pathway. And that's kind of what I was pushing towards. So because I saw there was 30% who had never heard of a credible messenger, and I know sometimes it can be kind of hard for them, people who are really not familiar with this language, to wrap their minds around that. So no, they don't have to meet all the criteria.
So I'm just gonna just piggyback off of Robert, just to really be clear. I'm gonna try to simplify, right? Credible messages. You're only as credible as the people that deem your experiences something that they want to build off of. So credibility comes from the people. It doesn't come. We don't call ourselves credible messengers, right? Mm-hmm. We don't go to school and train and get a certificate and say, "Oh, now you're a credible messenger." What it is we've been able to articulate, and most credible messengers, all credible messengers should be masterful storytellers, to be able to tell their story, and in their story, not giving any specific guidance to an outcome, but be able to share what their outcomes were, and that their resilience is up front now, and you can see the betterment in that individual now. And if there's opportunity to help someone else to strive to get to their best space, then we are available to support that with the individual that's asking for help. So anyone, and I'm saying any one of the 215 men and women who are in this space, can be credible to someone. So just wanted to make sure that was out there.
If I can jump in terms of another piece here, Jake. When Credible Messenger starts out, part of the desire is to change the narrative in terms of how formerly incarcerated persons were perceived by the overall masses, and particularly institutions and agencies and municipalities. I don't think that that's so much of a need today in some locations, particularly in the Northeast. Maybe Robert may see a little bit different where he is, but changing that narrative was very important in those early days. You know, that those coming from post-incarceration were not misfits, were not rejects, were not, just left out for nothing. Today, many of those in the early on were recipient of services, whereas today, now they're stewards of services. So you begin to see this growth, this shift, or this change. But part of it was simply to change the narrative that I'm a contributor to this society. I'm not, I'm not looking to continuously all my life be a recipient. I just want to throw that out, or uplift that idea.
So when we talk, so as you can see in New York, 2011 was the. I'm gonna take it a little bit further back than Artist 2011. So in New York City at the time, we were dealing with some really. We were under the mayorship of Michael Bloomberg. He was I think he was into his third term as mayor, and there was a lot of anxiety around in New York City around specific aggressive police actions against communities of color, and he had the big movement on stop and frisk, and really trying to absolve and these type of actions against Black and brown men and communities of color. And one of the things that came from that was the creation of the YMI, the Young Men's Initiative. And under Bloomberg's administration, through all of the heightened anxieties and aggressiveness and the interaction between community and policing, there was this space where Mayor Bloomberg was able to put together some of his philanthropic partners and some city funding and uh, and create this space called the Young Men's Initiative and give $110 million and said to some folks who were in his executive team that were kind of speaking to that there needed to be some type of paradigm shift about how Black and brown communities were being perceived or even being treated by law enforcement. Mayor Bloomberg then said, well, here's $110 million and figure it out. And in doing so, there were some innovative folks who came into probation, and I'm not going to really get into the history of probation and leadership, who had been mentor, who had kind of been students of Eddie Ellis and the Burns Institute, coming out of become social justice spaces, and were now involved in juvenile justice and criminal justice reform, and were in leadership roles to be able to kind of say, well, we have this opportunity. How do we create this collaborative? How do we move forward? How do we really say to folks that that we don't have, that systems don't have the answer? And I want to say this, that the system was never broken, but the outcomes weren't equitable to people of color. So and poor people of color. So what can we do to do something different? So in that space in 2011, the Artist program was created, and this was a space where we saw law enforcement, or in the law enforcement agency that was in charge of this process, or in charge of overseeing this work, was the New York City Department of Probation. And in this partnership was community-based organizations who were tasked to hire credible messengers. And then in the community, the probation would have a referral process and refer clients 16 to 24 to these different organizations who lived and operated and breathed as stewards in their communities. And in these spaces, we would be able to start to support the development and redirect, and a positive redirection of the young folks that were being referred to us in the Arches program. So I'm going to pass it on to Tiffany, because I think she has some more of that information around some of the other programming.
All right, thanks, Abdul. So yeah, with the creation of those programs, when Arches was created, there was a study or evaluation that was done to see how successful the program was. So in the first year, it recidivism was lowered by 57%. In year two, it was lowered by 69%. So, community folks, the system folks, the CBOs, they saw that the program was working. Bloomberg's philanthropists, they saw that the program was working. Pinkerton Foundation and many other private donors saw the program was working, so they pumped more money into us creating and developing. When I say us, because I work for the Department of Probation, developing additional program where we weren't just focusing on intervention. Now we could focus on prevention by creating the Next Steps program, which was New York City housing development based. We focused on 19 housing developments that were at risk, and we created Next Steps where they were in them high target crime areas, but we wanted to get them the program. We wanted to get them the programming, the resources that were needed for them to be, successful, not join the different gangs or become justice involved. We were able to make sure they had a hot meal every night, Metro cards, some stipends, among different things. But these different programs came from the development of the Arches program. And I'm just going to pass it on to John so he could speak a little bit further. I'll see if he has anything else he wants to add.
I think what's important is that we look at the development of these programs. One, they started within the system, and which meant that was the only place, I'm going to say New York City because that's where we were at the time, but it started within the system, meaning probation, but it was not by the traditional players that the system utilized or worked with. They recognized for this to be effective, they had to go outside of the system. And that's bringing in people who were on probation, people who were in the community-based, people who were traditionally not eligible for funding and citywide initiatives, people that, because maybe they didn't have a 501c or maybe they didn't have credentials, they would not be considered as players in this type of initiative. So this system had to go outside of the system to be able to find the right people to make this project work. And that's very important, because even today you find some of the people who can do the best work are outside of the system, whether it be because of the credentials, maybe because they are formally court involved, or a host of different things. So that becomes a part of what gives life to this. Again, I open it up. And again, you just see how it works. And we see where it's grown to where it is today. Whether you're looking at Arches, Next Steps. I think Next Steps, I would add, Next Steps, which was, as Tiffany said, based in housing, was a direct result because the New York City Housing Authority saw that the Arches was working. But now we wanted to have a concentration when we look at our housing complexes, these high-risk housing complexes, of the crime, the youth violence, or the other inappropriate behaviors that were there. We need to do this too. So they went more towards a preventive, which was necessary. And not only was it in the housing projects, but if I'm not mistaken, going back to it, you had to be a resident of the housing authority to be a participant in the program. That's how focused they wanted to be. You know, they just were not placing a program on their property. You had to be a tenant in their housing authority. That's how concentrated it was. And again, you see the success where in these high crime rate areas, crime was reduced, school enrollment increased, employment increased for the participants. All of these pro-social things were beginning to happen, not for the first time, no, but they were increasing because of the interventions of credible messengers, because of the Next Steps programs. And I will say here also, unlike today, most of these programs, all of these programs were run by community-based organizations. Probation was not, at that point, I say, ready to say, we sanction this. Whereas there would come a time where the credible messengers became directly employed by probation, and they became part of the probation team. And I think that you have a lot of that now. But initially, it was all community-based outside of the structure, although run by and managed by a structured agency. Tiffany, I'll give it back to you.
So I just want to, if Tiffany or Mom, I'm just going to jump in just to make sure that they understand what ICM is, and the Summer Neon programs are. So yeah. ICM is, these are programs that were created for the juvenile justice or family court participants in New York City. So the ICM Plus was is for intensive engagement for young folks after, more so after the Raise the Age was rolled out in New York State. So they wanted to make sure that they were credible messengers in place to kind of support these young folks who were driving most of the crime, and now having raised the age, they weren't going to adult operations. The influx of these young folks going into family court and family operation, there would need to be support for those young folks as well. And then the Summer Neon, which is Neon stands for Neighborhood Opportunity Network. If we look at it, has been branded by the New York City Department of Probation. These were initially the brick and mortars found in the 7 impacted neighborhoods around the city that were the drive, or at least the starting points for the Arches programming and where probation initially rolled out these initiatives. So now we have Neons, and Neon has Neon Works, Neon Arts, Neon Sports, different the neons themselves, neon satellites. These are not only brick and mortars, but it's an apparatus that's embedded in the New York City Department of Probation to support not only the 16 to 24-year-olds who initially the programs were rolled out for. Now they support everybody. So you from 16 to 80, whether you're formerly incarcerated or on probation, or just a regular person in the community looking to have, just looking to do something, whether artistically or just find another skill set, in these neon spaces that are not traditionally in the offices of probation, exist in the city to do the work. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear for those who might have wanted to know what the other programmings were. So what makes up a credible messenger?
So what makes up a credible messenger is someone that has the lived experience. They have a story to tell. They can speak. They have a testimony. Your personal transformation. How did you change your life? What was some of the measures you took to change your life? Community credibility. Are you deemed credible in your community? What have you done to pay it forward in your community? Who do you relate to in the community? Who looks up to you? How influential you are in your community? Having strong communication, listening skills, the mentoring experience, and the commitment. You have to be willing to have the time to meet with these young people. As a credible messenger, our job is never done, right? And for me, this is not a job, it's a passion, right? I'm an agent of change. So I'm gonna be the change that you want to see, people want to see. So in order for me to do that, I have to carry out everything that I say I'm gonna do, for a young person and as a mentor towards my peers, because you don't have to be a credible messenger just to young people. The mentoring it started with them, but you can utilize your expertise along, with your peers. And I'm going to let Robert jump in.
Yeah, as a credible messenger, it's all those things. And one of the things I also like to know, you could be credible and have personal transformation and strong communication and all those great things, but you have to have a level of emotional intelligence. And you also have to have a level of cultural competence. You can be credible in your community, or you can be credible in whatever population, but if you are not have a level of cultural competence, meaning what's going on right now with the population that you're dealing with, that will hinder your success as a credible messenger. And you have to be sympathetic and understanding and not allow your own personal emotions and your own personal experience, even though you lived it, to drive what you're doing, because essentially it is their life and it's your responsibility to give them that guidance to say, hey, I've seen this movie before and I can tell you how it ends, but I can assist you. And I think especially where I'm in Virginia right now, credible messengers is really a big thing in the South, and Virginia, North Carolina, things like that. It's been going on up north for a while, but here, and these are some of the things that I drive home, is that you have to understand the population dealing with, and be sensitive to every generation that you're talking to, so you understand how to make sure that your credibility matches up with your ability to lead them in a direction that they desire to go, on a positive direction. So I'll pass that along to Abdul.
So I'm just gonna. I don't want to cause controversy, but I'm gonna uptick the conversation real quick and flip this script real quick. So as all of these are all characteristics of credible messages. One thing I think Tiffany was alluded to is that mentors don't just mentor down; they mentor up. We have to be able to not only be in the trenches with the folks that we're servicing, but also be able to go into the spaces with those in systems who are kind of driving policy, to be able to be that moral voice at the table, and initiate the right conversations when and ask the right questions that are not being asked by the folks in the rooms. What I want to speak to is also about what Robert was saying. Powerful point about understanding the cultural competency and understanding the population and service. I always say this: I'm not in the business of saving lives. I'm in the business of facilitating change, and I think that is what drives me the most as being a credible messenger, because my responsibility is to give information, is to explore opportunities that young folks deem positive for themselves, right? Because everything that they think is positive might not look positive to the credible messenger. But as long as we can unpack the work that this young person is willing to do for him or herself, and it doesn't impede on somebody else's space, then we move those young people in those spaces, because their success is their success. I always say, right, their failure is their failure, their success is their success. Because guess what? As long as they're doing the work, no matter what happens, when when we leave them, they are still going to be the individuals they're going to be. So it is our responsibility to understand that for ourselves. So in our makeup and our DNA, we also have to be able to say we're not, we could be given any title. We could be we could be big bro, we could be, surrogate stepdad, we could be anything. But understanding what our work is, those are I like to say when young people refer to those type of special titles, they're not literally giving us that title. They're remembering that most impactful person for them, and they see those qualities in the individual who is now who they consider the credible messenger, who they want to support them to be the best individual they can be. And all of this and all of these points that's up here, one of the major points is making sure that we embed in how to advocate for themselves. Become self-efficacy is the biggest part of this, right? How do you speak up for yourself and do the work for yourself when we as credible messengers are no longer there? And then us as credible messengers, because we're homegrown, how do we in our work transition the relationships? So at one minute we're going to be that person that's going to hold them accountable, and then in several years from now we're going to be the same person sitting down with them, just discussing life and being philosophical. And I'm gonna put Dr. Ducksworth on blast right now. I know he's gonna be smiling in a minute, but John is my mentor. He's my credible messenger, and helped me to develop who I am today. And whereas I used to want to pull my hair out, as you can see, I'm bald as a result of it. Now I sit back and I could call on him and have the right conversations just to talk about, different opportunities and different things that I see and where the work is going. So these are valid points and very powerful spaces to what make up credible messages, but it's also the intrinsic work that has to be, the individual has to be able to understand who they are and what they deliver.
And I just want to add to that, Abdul. Often people say a credible messenger, like, is that your title? No, that's who I am. That's who I am. My title is I'm a regional director of reentry services somewhere, but a credible messenger is who I am at heart. I live to serve my people. I want to see my people successful. We've been marginalized for way too long. We've been counted out. I want to be counted in. I went to school. I got my master's. I could sit at these same tables and have these same discussions just like everyone else. I'm articulate, and that's what we want people to see. I don't want you to see, oh, here comes the felon in the room. No, I want you to see, here comes Tiffany Branch, credible messenger / director of whatever, doctor, whatever, that's who I am. And I also wanted to add, lost my train of thought. But again, basically that, yeah. Oh, so we're moving to the next slide. Let me jump right in. So some of the goals and objectives of credible messenger work is reducing harm, right? And reducing violence. How do we do that? I'm just some statistics that I looked up, right? In 2015, I realized, I know that's a little far back, but there was $43 billion spent on housing people that were incarcerated or pre-trial or, post incarceration, $43 billion. Think about what we could spend $43 billion on, reinvesting into our communities, making our young people better, employing those people that are coming out of incarceration, getting them educated. So it's alternative ways to lower crime and violence besides just locking everyone up and using punitive measures. Rob, you want to jump in?
Sure. Prime example, like I said, I'm here in Danville and we work with the population, 24 to 16, but really work with everyone. And you're talking about reducing crime without, incarceration. One of the things I'm really proud of that occurred because of collaboration is that there was a area in the city where car thefts was going off the chain. They even brought in the federal government, FBI. So we ended up connecting with a group of kids over there, working with them. And within 3 months, car theft went down 67%. And that came through credible messengers going over there, being credible, being able to go in the neighborhood and not even really doing anything, but just showing up and just small things like, one of the kids' babies was sick, and one of the credible messengers went over there and it's like, man, you came over here and my mother didn't. Those are the intangibles that you really can't, quantify. But that really reduced crime. And a lot of those guys who probably would have went to jail because stealing cars and all those things, they ended up coming into the program and doing a lot of great things. So definitely being a credible messenger. And as you said, Tiffany, is 24 hours a day. And Abdul, being Unc, we call ourselves the new aunts and uncles because we are a support system that these young people don't have. So they look to us to intervene in school. They look to us to intervene in the court system and give them guidance. So as you can tell, very passionate about that because we've seen this in some real life stuff. Our program operates the whole city. So able to see that impact and then hear that story being told by the chief of police during a reporting session to city council impacts the rest of the city and then creates that belief from other youth. So yeah, really good stuff. So Tiffany, I'll send it back to you. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So just wanted really quick. So what Tiffany and Robert are talking about is, I'm going to say this too, it's not just the individual, it's the credible relationship, right? Because the relationships that I'm just kind of bring home the points that all of us are talking about relationships. And one thing about our relationship is we kind of set the bar to hold young people accountable. And then we have our third eye is able to look at some of the and create accountability that is attainable by the young folks we service, right? So we're not trying to set the bar to the traditional standards that some of our young people have never been able to really get to, but we set small, tangible expectations and we hold young people accountable. So in doing that, reducing harm, violence, and crime is when we have the credible relationship, right? We then ask our young people to get involved, and then we show them how to take ownership in their community, right? And when Rob talked about just going to these spaces, to these public hearings, and hearing the same system that's out there, being the ops to our young people, saying, "Nah, this is working," and we need to have more of these brothers out there supporting these young people. It really starts to set the paradigm and shift the paradigm for young people to believe that they're now active, positive participants in the community, as opposed to active participants in a crime that they're looking to that the police is looking to solve. So we switch it, and when we start switching the language, because we deliberately switch the relationships and we build these positive relationships, it is not about the intentional impact on crime, harm, and violence is no longer, it's not our intention. Our intention is to build healthy young people, have healthy relationships, and then they move away from those harmful activities that would incarcerate them or kind of destroy the communities that they come from. So I'm like, this is not magic, right? I always say I have no type of, I don't have a gift. I don't do anything out of the ordinary. I just do me, right? And when I'm doing me with my young people, or we're doing us together, guess what? We're not focused on police or the gang members, right? Because when we're doing the right thing and we help them create those habits, right? Because we're constantly doing, like Robert said, when we build structure, we deliver on that structure, and we hold young people accountable in these community structures, right? Not justice system structures, not traditional system structures, but our community structure that where they leave a school, they coming back home, right? And some of our young folks are gonna say, I'm never leaving my community. Yeah, I never left my community either. I've been all around the world, but I still come home, right? And now I'm actively participating and making sure that the babies that come up behind me, that come up with my children, have examples of how to sustain their communities and love their communities and love themselves when all of us move on to the next level in our lives.
I'm gonna just piggyback a little bit off of that. And us being the credible messengers, it's our responsibility also to teach the young people how to do this work. So I'm going to say last year, myself, and a CPO of an organization launched, the peer-to-peer justice workshop, justice impacted workshops. We taught young people what it is to be a peer. What is peer work, right? We taught them about civic engagement and keys to civic engagement. What's that all about? Exposure, visiting different places, enrichment. We taught them about social justice and social impact. We also taught them about credible messenger work. We have to also teach them this because we're not going to be here forever. And we need them to take over and lead the way, right? But we need them to lead the way where they actually know what they're doing, and they're not just the blind leading the blind. So teaching them the work is one thing. And then on the other end, in New York, we use, I don't know where other places might use it as well, we use curriculums where it involves cognitive behavior therapy. We want the young person to recognize the crime that they've done, hold themselves accountable, and see and think of ways that they could have changed the behavior. So helping them or assisting them with transforming the way that they think will help them make better and healthier decisions. So I just wanted to add that. Anyone else want to jump in on this one?
I'll pass to Tiffany. You and Abdul and Robert are doing a wonderful job on this one.
Go to the next slide.
Yeah, we can move to the next slide then. So in regards to scope of work, Robert, you want to elaborate on this one?
Talking about the scope of work, reducing crime and violence and harms committed by youth, reducing legal costs, promotes education and pathways, mainstream society, provides alternatives from the street and non-pro-social activities, and challenge communities and larger society. All of this, and I'll let you guys elaborate on this, but all of this comes from the foundational relationship. If you're going to be an effective, credible messenger, the first thing that you have to do for an individual, the first thing you have to do is you have to look at them as being human. There's no such thing as I'm older than you and you're younger than me. No, it has to be, we are two beings coming together with mutual respect. And you hear a lot of young people say, especially in this generation, now 16, 17, they talk about respect, and being older, you may not understand what respect is because our idea of respect was shaped differently than theirs. This is my definition of respect that I found for young people. And I break it up into two words. Read means to do again. Expect means to look at or to view. So when you're talking about respecting someone, being a credible messenger, meeting them for the first time, and being able to do this scope of work, the first thing you have to do is look at them, meaning that you have to look past what you see and look at what they can be and the gifts and abilities and strengths that they have in order for you to be credible to them. Because the outward appearance may be something totally different than the inward desire. So if you're going to assist them in reducing crime, if crime and violence and harms committed by you, if you're going to assist them in reducing legal costs and correction and keeping them out of the probation system, the first thing you have to do is develop that relationship. And I found that many times, especially in my generation, I'm not going to call it, but that older than these teenagers, we want to be respected first and then listened to second on the initial contact. And it doesn't work that way. It has to be being to being. So if you want all these outcomes and being able to do that and having that skill level and having that emotional intelligence and allowing them to be able to change local communities and large society, you have to impact that first individual that you contact. Your credibility of what you've done does have some impact, but without respect, you get no impact. And I think if there's any shortcomings to operating as a credible messenger, it's that initial contact of, do you see me as your equal, as a living, breathing being? because without that, none of this is possible. And I'll pass this on to you, Tiffany.
Yes, and we could actually, you did a great job. Thank you, Robert. We could actually move on to the next slide. And John, you could start us off on this credible messenger future, what we're looking for in the future, our work, the work ahead of us.
Before I speak to this slide, I just want to piggyback on something Robert said. I was in a meeting unrelated to being a credible messenger, and someone said, before we can correct, we have to connect. And I think that is so true. We have to connect before we correct. And I think within the credible messenger world, that's a clearly understood. We first try to connect to be able to correct. In terms of the future, the slide is, everyone can see the slide, but I'd like to give some other words to it as I'm sitting here thinking, what do I see as the future of the credible messengers? One, and I think there's good and bad to this, but I do see this coming down the pipe, is a credentialing or licensing for credible messengers by municipalities. Again, I have mixed emotions about that, but I do see that almost like legitimizing credible messengers. Another thing I see is, I think there will come a time where credible messengers will not be heavily dependent on exclusively court involved. We will begin to see grassroots people from the community-based and neighborhood-centered persons falling within, the definition of credible messenger. And I think that speaks to something that Abdul said much earlier. So I see the future of it not be solely dependent on those who are formally court involved. Thirdly, I see credible messengers increased advancement in the criminal and juvenile and social justice arenas across the country, where they will move up the ladders within these institutions. And that way, that will broaden the scope of what their influence and what they can do. I know enough of, and I don't want to tell other people's stories, but I know enough about it, a couple of people on this call, where we are not where we started out 10 years ago. And because of that advancement, because of that growing up the ladder, the scope of our influence has broadened. I know I can definitely say that for myself. I think the future of it, institutions, and here I'm talking about government institutions and non-government institutions, are beginning to see the legitimacy of not only credible messengers, but the mentoring itself by credible messengers. And I'm beginning to see mentoring entities looking at the credible messenger model and see it as a legitimacy. I mean, the mere fact that we're on this webinar, which is sponsored by a mentoring entity, demonstrates that the world of mentoring is beginning to see the legitimacy of the credible messenger model of mentoring. Additional administrative and management roles by credible messengers, not only in the criminal justice system, but across the board in government systems and nonprofits, for-profits, academia, becoming policymakers. Robert mentioned the fact that, that moving the credible messenger into the mainstream society. All of these are all mainstream society, not necessarily limited to the criminal justice world. And I also see the expansion of the credible messenger in the terms of LGBT community, veterans, migrants, domestic violence, all of these survivors beginning to recognize the value of the credible messenger, not in the sense of someone having been court involved and being part of that community, but someone who has been in that community and been marginalized by society, and then they being able to step up to the plate and be a mentor, be a credible messenger. So I think that's where it's going. And lastly, as the screen says, additional research, fact finding, and receiving new benchmarks. So I think I think the world is open and there are opportunities here in this work. And I look back at 2011, 2012, where people who were formerly incarcerated were just trying to get a job, probably the lowest paying job within the agency. And now you see where it has moved, it has grown, has expanded, has become legitimate. So that's what I see as the future. And I open it up, for any of you to share or even
So
disagree.
I'm gonna jump in there because there's one part of the vision, right? So we understand. This is what I'm saying to people in the room. Not only this can no longer be exclusive to our communities and places where um, funding from criminal justice entities or social justice entities is primary. We need to also start thinking about creating incubators and small institutions, collaborating with, the community colleges, collaborating and creating spaces where we could really develop and start to professionalize the work. Right, credible messengers are not. There is no cookie cutter to being a credible messenger in any of the communities or countries around the world that's on this webinar. Right, so then we also have to be as primed to be able to develop the human service worker, right? Because that's what we are. We're human service workers, right? We serve humanity, and like John, like Robert, like Tiffany, I also went back to school, got my BA, got my master's to do this work, and we need to be able to kind of create opportunities because we're what I like to call the new street level bureaucrat, and we're the ones that can impact decisions immediately when it comes to de-escalating crises. But we also have to be in when they're hosting community board meetings, when they're hosting a ward, when they're having ward elections or citywide elections for city council or mayoral races, if they're doing things that elect judges, we need to start empowering our young people to understand that their voice is powerful, that their voice means something. All right. And when they start changing, because when they change, they're gonna be like, well, what do I do next? Right? Because it's always most credible messages, and we get caught in the pigeonhole. I know some of us I know I used to do this back in the days. It was either prison or death. If you keep doing this, you're gonna go to jail. If you keep doing this, you're gonna get killed. And the young people used to be like, Abdul, stop talking to me like that. I don't care about that. What else is out there if I don't when I decide to go where you want me to go and what you want me to experience, what happens for me then? And then I had to kind of step back for myself and give you a little story. I had to step back for myself and say, wow, my story is not your story. My experience is not your experience. And we can easily eclipse a young person's story by giving us these elaborate war stories of being incarcerated, right? I mean, yeah, I went to prison, like Tiffany said. We were all recipients. And I like to say I was a involuntary recipient of the services of the state of New York correctional system. But in the same interim, now I deliver services, understanding my own biases and how the system impacted me, right? My own trauma. I also had to make sure that I don't impose my trauma on a young person trying to get them to do the right thing. It is, as a credible message, it's imperative to understand it is not your responsibility to change or save a young person. It is your responsibility to create the opportunity and space for them to change and be there when they want to ask that question, right? Because I'm a sounder boy. I don't have all the answers. I don't have 90% of the answers my young people ask me for. If it ain't something we can't go on Google and find, I'm like, all right, I don't know. Well, let's figure it out together. And then we explore it because that's where change happens when we're able to explore the challenges that these young folks face, right? When we walk into those spaces with them as cheerleaders. Like I always tell my young people when I do work, like I'm gonna give one more story and pass it because I'm looking at the time. I'm gonna be respectful for having questions and answers. There was a time when my young man wanted to go get a job. So I was like, okay. So he asked me, he said, could you join me to go? I want you to go with me to the job interview. I was like, you want me to go with you to the job interview? I said, that's not how this works. You have to go on your own. He was like, no, I'm not going by myself. If you don't go, I'm not going to go. All right, I'm gonna go. And when I went there, I told him, I said, you know what you got to do? Yeah, I got to bring my working card. I got to bring my ID. I'm gonna meet you there after school. And I was like, make sure you clean. And he wasn't a dirty kid, but I just said, make sure you clean. And my impression with clean meant was put on a shirt and tie. Well, his clean meant was he had on a clean white t-shirt, his kicks was clean, and he had on his jeans. And when we walked in, I had a shirt and tie on. He had on jeans and a t-shirt. And I'm like, okay, look, we're gonna figure this out, right? And what happened was he wasn't successful that first time going to the job. And I think he was going to get a job at Burger King. But after we went through that, I mean, his feelings was hurt because all the other little kids was in there, was in some Catholic school kids in there with their little uniforms on everything. And here this young man had his hair cut, white t-shirt on, jeans and sneakers, thinking that was appropriate to go for this job. And it wasn't, right? And we had to go through that experience. And of course, as the mentor coordinator, as a credible messenger, what was my responsibility? I went and talked to the managers like, this is my young man's first time. He's from your community and he needs an opportunity. And the manager was like, for sure, let him come back next week and we'll interview him again. But the next week, that whole week, we kind of went through that whole process. Well, clean, and I had to apologize for not defining what I meant for being clean. So we learned how to tie a tie. We got some pants. We went to a clothes pantry and got some things out of there because we didn't buy anything new. But we took some things that was available. We put it together and we went back. He didn't get the job the second time, but he felt better about himself going in to do it. And from that space, he was able to continue to go back and understood what the process was about going to get a job and what it looks like to be presentable when he went to get the job, when he's going out there looking for work. So yeah, these are the things I'm talking about. Like, it's not about changing. It's not about us changing anybody, right? Because that's not our responsibility, And I always say, people, when I'm in that role of changing somebody and they fail, I fail too. And I'm not really about. I don't like failing too much. I got enough of that on my plate, so I'm trying to get as much wins as I can get. So I really stay focused on making sure that we always pay attention to our own personal biases, right? When we look at what the future looks like. And I just want to say what John talked about. We already, the future's now. I don't know if people ever paid attention, and it's just some things I learned in school. They always look beyond the block, right? And credible messenger language is in national conversations with the president. And it's not a lot. It's a little bit. It's little blurbs here and there, but it's definitely a conversation that's happening. And knowing in 2024 there's a presidential election, hint, that this is the time for us to really push this work ahead and make sure whoever's going wants to be our next president or our next congressperson or our next senator understands that this language has to be embedded on a national, international level.
So I'm just going to say a few sentences before we wrap up the slide. Like, working and being a liaison for the Credible Messenger Justice Center, when I stepped in to the position in 2017 when it was created, they had 2 partnerships and 833 people in their network. I came in with my own network, and upon my departure just a couple of weeks ago, I leave them with over almost 5,000 people, over 4,800 people in the network and 21 partnerships. So whoever's saying or don't believe that it's not working, it's working. It's expanded. I've did some TA and some consulting with some folks over in Berlin. They launched their program November 2022. So it's working. People are hearing us. I've did some interviews in Myanmar, China with some folks over there. So it's working. You just got to believe. You got to believe in reinvestment. You got to believe in the future of our young people. And you have to believe in yourself that you are an agent of change. So we can move to the next slide. Oh, Robert, go ahead.
Now, just to go back to John's point about the future, we're kind of seeing the future here in Danville. We have credible messengers volunteer who are becoming violence interrupters. They bought into what we're doing. They bought into They didn't feel like they had a voice in the city. They didn't feel like they had opportunity to assist the city in the way the previous structure was, but creating the Project Imagine model and giving them a voice. Individuals who qualify as credible messengers, who are credible messengers, but are not employed, but they're doing it because they want to see their community do better, have become violence interrupters, and we'll get phone calls about, look, this happened over the weekend. This is what's going on. This is what this side and this side, we just want to let you know. And so to your point, John, what we're talking about here, the future is really coming from grassroots. We have to be wise enough to know how to structure that and use our leveraging points in the positions that we have to give them an opportunity to have a voice, because essentially we're doing the work that was essentially done previously by communities, as they say, the village. And so this transition to credible messengers gives individuals who were once voiceless opportunity to be a part of the community, which exponentially impacts their life because now they feel purposeful. So I just want to say that about the future. So a lot of good stuff going on with credible messengers.
Tiffany, before we go into the next slide, I'm gonna violate one of my own rules here. And as I'm sitting here thinking about how we're trying to present to people credible messengers, I can't help as I'm sitting here think about gentleman. I'm gonna call his name is Darnell, because I don't want to put him out there. But I look at his life, and I don't know if he's comfortable sharing or not. If he's within the sound of my voice, how he has come through this system, almost like a person. I'm asking to do a personal testimony, quite frankly, from the time we met into where he is, the heights he's accomplished today. Because people respond to a personal story. And, if he's comfortable sharing his personal story, I would encourage him to do that. Because again, he becomes the face of where we've come from, where we are, and where we hope to go. So I'm gonna do that to him.
So that's me. So John did it. All right. So for those, let me give you a little bit of background. So I met John in 2012. I was just coming. I've been home about 6 years, and I was doing some reentry work, really trying to find my space. And I fall into the space of becoming the lead mentor for John Ducksworth Arches program, and under the leadership of Reverend Q and Tim English at the and FedCap, in collaboration with FedCap at the Bronx Clergy Criminal Justice Roundtable. And it was a part of a larger, intimate conversation I had with John one day, where he asked me, he said, if I had somebody in this room, it was two impactful moments. It was first when I first interviewed him, and I'm sitting there in a shirt and tie myself, pulling at my necktie, trying to figure out, why am I sitting here in front of these folks in the tie and interviewing for a job that they already know they're gonna give me. And John has always been impactful with how he naturally articulates certain things, and I'm gonna leave it at that. He says to me, I'm gonna hire you, but what am I gonna hire you for? I just looked at him. I was like, I already have the job. Like, but it was like, I don't have to hire you for that, but let's see what you can do. And from that space, I understood that I was being challenged. And then the next conversation was I'm sitting in his office, and he says that there's two people with you and another person, you have the exact same resume. And the only difference between you and this person is this person has a college degree and you don't. Who's better? And I just looked at him. I was like, me. And he said, I knew you would say that. He said, but that's not the truth. He's better because they're better than you because of the credentials. And that was the turning point. So 3 years later, I finished my undergrad. 5 years later, I finished my grad. Got my master's degree in 2019. It was 2020? I was involved on a national campaign, which he's talked about with then presidential candidate Mike Bloomberg. I was on his national safety policy team. So when they talk about credible messages being written into the national policy, I was while I was in grad school, I was actually on that team, that national team, writing to that language. And currently, one of my roles is I lead the mentor coordination in a city agency. I'll leave it at that. Um, moving credible messages into spaces to support the system from the inside. And I've become somewhat of a think leader in this work. So thank you, John, for putting me on the spot. I didn't want to make this about me, but there is and I always say that this was not anything that I had intentions of, but understanding as a credible message. And one of the things when we look at redemption, we make that connection to a higher power, right? So I'm gonna get a little bit sentimental. Understand that I couldn't be in this space without my belief in a higher power. I think that also drives us in this work, that there is something greater than us, and we have a mission to create our space in our next life. So, John, thank you for that. I'm gonna get him later, so I'm just putting that on a national scale. I'm gonna get him back, but not right now. And I think that's the story right there.
Jake?
Yes. So I'm going to jump in, but thank you all so much for this amazing discussion. There's never going to be enough time to talk about all of this. I do want to make sure that we have some time for a few of the audience questions. I know we had one more slide with a quote, so I'll just leave that up for folks to read and reflect on. And if we have time, we can touch on it a little bit. But there's a question that's coming up from folks that honestly, any of you, I think, would be able to answer, and I would love to hear your insights on. But it's around how has it been getting buy-in from government officials and agencies, and how do you respond to any resistance that you've experienced from those entities?
I've worked with so far I've worked with 4 different government agencies, 4 different jurisdictions. New York City, Washington, D.C., here in Connecticut, where I'm at today, and others. There is always resistance. However, when government realizes the fact that it has failed or it needs the help, then there's a willingness to be receptive to help. But only when they seem to realize everything else has failed. I've never been with a jurisdiction that woke up one day and said, hey, let's do this. There's always been hesitancy. There's always been resistance, regardless on what side of the aisle. But once they have recognized that there's been failure, then all of a sudden, hey, we're partners. Come on down. That's been my experience.
And I just want to piggyback off of that. My experience has been being someone who worked in systems as well, and being able to let system folks know that like Abdul said, your story is not that young person or that person from the hood, quote unquote, story. You don't know what they need. They know what they need. So you have to have the right people at the table to let you know these are the services we need. These are the resources we need. You're going to have that person there, because you can't decide that. And when you see all else has failed, I'm quoting John, then you become desperate. And they seek out the help of the community, the credible messengers, and they even band with the other entities or the credible messenger or the CBO to try to get other system folks on board. And I'll open up the floor.
So I think one of the ways that was a breakthrough here was the adoption of the OJJDP comprehensive gang model, which is an advocate for credible messenger, and presenting that to municipalities. I work under the city manager, so getting that buy-in was basically leaning back on the structure or the entity that said this is effective. And so what I found around in other cities is that they may not be under necessarily OJJDP, but they may be doing community violence intervention model, whatever. And as I said, when you know, shootings and everything, violent crime has increased, and they see one city like adopting credible messengers and it's been impactful, then they'll try to do their version. So at least, you know, in the South and places I've been, you know, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, that's been kind of the trend, is that the model really, you know, personally helped me kind of push forward and say, okay, this is what they say is effective. You know, you can't say no against this when it's been proven to be true.
Jake, if I can also add to your question, I suspect that many of the people here on this call are advocates within their local communities. And I would also say this here, their role of advocacy towards whether it be credible messengers, reform in our criminal justice system, reform in our juvenile justice system, wherever that advocacy has held it, in what space they've held it, I think that's also important. So I want to say that to the advocates that are on this call, you know, your work has definitely opened the door for the work that we do and going forward. So if you know, so don't stop, because we need that advocacy, whether from directly or indirectly involved persons. But I just wanted to recognize that their work has also made it possible for us to do our work.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for adding that. The next question that I think I'm seeing a couple times, maybe we'll start with Robert, just because I know some of the ways that you approach your work, and I really love the way you talk about how you got some of your beginnings in moving to a new place. But the question that someone has is, how do you find or recruit people for this work? And so love to hear from you, Robert, and then anybody else who wants to jump in.
I touched on it briefly, just go into a city treating everyone human. And one of the things I did coming from North Carolina to Virginia, not knowing anyone, and Danville is very much I need to know you kind of city, is that I use relationship brokers. So I went to the neighborhood and I kind of began a general conversation with the matriarchs, and just sitting and talk with the matriarchs and patriarchs and hanging out in the community and being seen. And I would go to events and I wouldn't say anything to anyone sometimes. You have to understand, when you're going into communities, there's a level of trust. I always make the kind of analogy that if I offer any of you $500,000 to meet me somewhere at 9:00 at night, you still wouldn't take it because there's no trust factor. But when you're a credible messenger or developing relationships, you have to slowly create that relationship and that build that trust. And once someone in the community buys into you, they're going to tell someone else. And that's when you use a relationship broker to continually build those relationships. And that's what was successful. My credibility, being able to go in the community, I was only able to reach a certain level because I wasn't from there. But being able to reach those individuals who had credibility on a different level, and something we don't talk about, what is your credibility level? Depending on where you are and what you're doing. It went from level to level to level. And so that's kind of how you do it, just using relationship brokers and just being seen and present and being personable.
Great, thank you. So many great questions coming in. I think the next one that I'd love to hear from you all, and I think we've already sort of touched on pieces of this, that so much of it has to come from internally and has to come from your own experience and being invested in the communities that we serve. But someone had a question around how do you keep credible messengers that you work with and mentors that you work with? How do you keep those folks motivated, especially when this work can be really hard? And to Abdul's point, there's a lot of processing of your own trauma and bringing that back up and that sort of thing. So how do you keep folks motivated? And maybe I'll start with Abdul for that one.
Tatum. Let's be real clear. This work has become monetized. Is a fee for this service, right? And in systems, systems cannot be blind to think this work can no longer be done for free when they have the resources to put into new prisons, hiring more officers, infrastructure. Credible messengers in the community are part of the community infrastructure, and if they have intentions of helping to reimagine justice or support reimagining justice in communities that these municipalities are in charge of or oversee, then they need to be responsible with the equity and pay the credible messengers and value their work. I also say for credible messengers or mentors in general, they need to also value themselves. I think the exciting part about this is that as long as they're in spaces to be in their own space to be lifetime learners and explore explore life and explore and explore other things that create opportunities to think outside the box. I think that also is motivating. Like for myself, I would have never thought 10 years ago, and John could say this wholeheartedly. I didn't see myself in this space 10 years ago. But 10 years later, I'm like, now I'm hungry to see where I go next, right? So also understanding that as some of us, and I like what Robert said, knowing your level where you are as a credible messenger, and being comfortable knowing your level as a credible messenger. I'm gonna add on to that, so that person that brokers the relationship who yields more influence in a space in a particular community, being able to pour into them. So while they're Batman, I become Robin, right? And I support him or her developing their niche to the game to support their community, right? Credibility doesn't come from me. Like I love what Robert said, walking into a space, and like I'm a credible messenger. I'm here to save you. I ask people all the time, young people that come, I'm a credible messenger. I say, what makes you credible? And then there's a whole nother conversation, and they don't even know they talking to an OG. I'm like, what makes you credible? And understanding that they hold on to that, but also making sure that the value is not in the title. The value is for me is in knowing who I am, developing me. And I think going back to what the question was, that what motivates me to stay consistent in this work is that I'm looking to do better. I'm looking to do better for myself. And if I could do better for myself, then I could do better for my community. But pay them first.
Thank you. Yeah, I do just want to be mindful of time, but I would love, and thanks for all those who are still here, and for all of these really amazing questions. I'm sorry we don't have time to get to them all, but again, like I said, this is just the beginning of a conversation. I want to give space to all of our panelists if there's any final words that you'd like to share, any things that you would like people to take with them as they go back to do their work across the country and the world.
I'll go first real quickly. One, I encourage people to look at the screen, the quote that's on the screen, about those closest to the problem and usually those closest to the solution. However, they are usually those furthest from the resources, i.e. pay them, and decision making. So I throw it out. The other thing I would leave, we haven't talked about it here, but I'm a strong believer that the faith community has a significant role and responsibility in this work. So again, I just throw that out. And thank you for having me. And
I'll just go really quickly. Jake, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. Also, John is my mentor. He had to sit me down a few times as well. Robert, it was good to, get to know you. Abdul, we work together all the time, different spaces, different places. I want to thank everyone who showed up, who listened. This work is not easy. It's not easy. It's no walk in the park, but we got to take it day by day and remember that we can't change everybody, or excuse me, not change. We can't assist with them changing themselves or transforming, but it only takes one. It only takes one. Success is not fatal. Success is not failure. And, it's not fatal. We'll get through it. So thank you. And I'm going to pass it on.
Yeah, thank all you guys. Great work with you guys. My closing words is just, be passionate in this work. You got to be passionate. Be that person that you wanted someone to be to you when you were in that situation. And be just as passionate, be just as diligent, and be just as focused on those individuals to assist them. But definitely got to be passionate. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Jay.
So I just want to say thank you. I always say this in all my groups when I'm doing groups. One, I want to say thank you to the panelists. Robert, it's a pleasure meeting. I'm really get to talk enough. I look forward to talking to you. Jake, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this space. Thank you to the community for having me. Brother John, I love you. Tiff, I love you too. But I always say this to folks. If nobody told you they love you today, let me be the first one to tell you I love you. Stay blessed. Stay strong in the work.
What a perfect and beautiful way to end it. Thank you all so much to our panelists. There's so much love for you all in the chat and the reactions. You all have a lot of fans. And again, this was such an incredible conversation. It was very, very great to work with you all on this. And thank you all for those who showed up today, who engaged with the conversation and who are doing this work. We'll send out the recording and the slides after this with any other follow-up information, but feel free to keep in contact with us. And again, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and take care. We'll see you in the next one. Bye, everybody.